Emily couldn't take her eyes off that bluish light pulsing in the garden. It was as if she were hypnotized, caught in a trance from which she didn't want to escape. Her parents had always warned her never to leave the house during the night, especially alone. But there was something about that light that seemed to call her by name, as if it knew her deepest thoughts and most secret desires. With her heart pounding against her chest, Emily made a decision that would change her life forever. Silently, she grabbed her navy blue robe hanging behind the door, put on her bunny slippers, and with the utmost care not to make noise, left her room. The hallway was plunged into darkness, except for the small star-shaped nightlight near her younger brother Nathan's room, who was only 5 years old and still afraid of the dark. Emily could hear her father's soft snores coming from the master bedroom and the occasional murmur of her mother, who always talked in her sleep. No one would notice her absence, at least not for a few hours. With steps as light as feathers, Emily descended the stairs, carefully avoiding the third step that always creaked, and reached the entrance hall. The back door was locked, as it always was at night, but Emily knew where her mother kept the spare key, inside a small porcelain box shaped like a frog, hidden on the highest shelf of the living room bookcase. Before continuing, follow the channel. After retrieving the key with trembling fingers, Emily unlocked the back door and felt the cool night air caress her face. The garden seemed different under the moonlight, as if it had been transported to another world. The shadows of trees and bushes formed strange figures that seemed to move when observed from the corner of the eye. The circle of bluish light was still there, pulsing gently, now seeming even brighter and more inviting. Emily took a step outside, then another, feeling the grass wet with dew between her toes, as her slippers had been left behind in the rush to leave. As she approached the luminous circle, Emily began to hear a soft melody, like a lullaby being sung by several small, high-pitched voices in a language she didn't know, but which somehow seemed familiar, as if it were a memory from a long-forgotten dream. The air around the circle seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, causing the hairs on her arms to stand on end. When she was just a few steps away, Emily finally managed to see clearly what was moving inside the circle. It was a small creature, no bigger than a squirrel, with skin as shiny as blue porcelain and large, round eyes that reflected the moonlight like small mirrors. The creature had translucent wings that resembled those of a dragonfly and wore what appeared to be clothes made of leaves and flower petals. Before continuing, follow the channel. "Hello, Emily Thompson," said the small creature in a voice that sounded like wind chimes tinkling softly. "We have been waiting for you for a long time." Emily was paralyzed, not with fear, but with absolute astonishment. Thousands of questions flooded her mind at once. How did that creature know her name? What did it mean by, "We've been waiting"? Were there more of them? And why would she, Emily, an ordinary girl from a small town, be expected by creatures that seemed to have come straight out of the pages of her fairy tale books? Who are you?" Emily finally managed to ask, her voice coming out as a trembling whisper. The creature tilted its head slightly to the side, as if the question had confused it. "I am Thimble, a messenger of the luminous ones. We were sent to find the child who can see, and our signs led us to you." Emily frowned, confused. "Child who can see? I don't understand. See what?" Thimble opened a smile that revealed tiny, pointed teeth, white as pearls. "See beyond the veil, of course. See what is hidden. See what has always been here, but which most humans have forgotten how to perceive." As he spoke, Thimble made a broad gesture with his tiny hands, and suddenly Emily realized they were no longer alone in the garden. Around them, dozens of small lights began to appear like fireflies, but each revealing a creature similar to Thimble, some larger, some smaller, some with butterfly wings instead of dragonfly, others with skin in different shades of blue and green. "Before continuing, follow the channel. We need your help, Emily," continued Thimble, his expression becoming serious. "Something terrible is happening in our world, something that is affecting your world too, although you humans haven't noticed yet. The veil between our worlds is unraveling, and if it isn't repaired soon, both sides will suffer catastrophic consequences." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Part of her wanted to believe that all of this was just an elaborate dream, that she would soon wake up in her warm, safe bed, but another part, the part that that had always known there was more to the world than adults admitted, knew that this was real. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Why do you think I can help?" Thimble exchanged glances with the other creatures before answering. "Because you have the gift, Emily. You've always had it. That's why you see things that others don't see, feel things that others don't feel. That's why you found that book in the library, a book that shouldn't have been there. It was our way of getting your attention." Emily remembered the book about local legends, how it seemed to have suddenly appeared on the shelf, as if it had been waiting for her. "So, what do you want me to do?" she asked, her curiosity now completely overcoming any trace of fear she might still feel. Thimble extended his small hand toward Emily. "Come with us, just for tonight. There's something we need to show you, something that only the child who can see will be able to understand." Emily looked back at the house behind her, at her bedroom window on the second floor. Her parents would be worried if they discovered she had gone out during the night. She could get into serious trouble. But then she looked again at Thimble and the other luminous creatures, beings that shouldn't exist according to all the adults she knew, but who were there before her eyes, asking for her help. "Do you promise to bring me back before dawn?" she asked, her decision already practically made. Thimble nodded solemnly. "You have the word of the luminous ones. Time flows differently in our realm, but we will ensure that you return before the sun rises in your world." Emily took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she possessed. This was exactly the kind of adventure she had always dreamed of, the kind of story she read in books and secretly wished would happen to her. Now it was really happening, and despite the fear of the unknown, the excitement was much greater. With one last look at her house, Emily extended her hand and touched Thimble's tiny fingers. The moment their skin touched, the circle of bluish light rapidly expanded, completely enveloping her. Emily felt a strange sensation, as if she were floating and sinking at the same time. The lights around her spun faster and faster until all she could see was a blur of bright colors. And then, in the blink of an eye, her house's garden disappeared. When the world stopped spinning and Emily finally managed to focus her vision again, she found herself in a place that defied everything she knew about reality. She was in a forest, but not like any forest she had ever seen before. The trees were enormous, with trunks so wide that 10 people holding hands could barely embrace them, and so tall that their crowns were lost in the cloud. But the most impressive thing was that these trees emitted a soft glow, as if they had absorbed the light of the stars. Their leaves were not green, but in shades of blue, purple and silver, and seemed to sparkle with every light breeze that passed. The ground was covered with a soft moss that glowed as if small lights were interwoven in its texture, illuminating Emily's steps with a trail of light that disappeared a few seconds later. The air was different too, denser, richer, loaded with aromas she had never smelled before, sweet and wild at the same time. Emily took a deep breath, feeling as if each breath filled her not just with air, but with a strange and invigorating energy. Around her, hundreds of luminous ones flew or walked, some as small as Thimble, others the size of human children. All stopped what they were doing to observe her, their bright eyes fixed on her, with expressions ranging from curiosity to awe, from hope to distrust. "Welcome to the realm of the luminous ones," said Thimble, who was still holding her hand. "This is the eternal twilight forest, the heart of our world." Emily turned slowly, trying to absorb every detail of that extraordinary place. There were constructions in the trees, elaborate houses made of what appeared to be silver wood and crystal, connected by delicate bridges that shone like spider webs covered with morning dew under the sun. Small lights floated through the air like fireflies, but Emily soon realized they were actually tiny winged creatures, no larger than hummingbirds, leaving trails of shimmering dust wherever they went. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen," whispered Emily, genuinely amazed. But then something caught her attention. Amid all that dazzling beauty, there were areas where the trees seemed to be losing their glow, where the moss was darkening as if it were dying, and most disturbing, in some spots Emily could see what appeared to be tears in the air itself, like rips in a fabric, through which there was nothing but an absolute and disturbing darkness. "What are those things?" she asked, pointing to one of the nearest rifts. Thimble's expression became somber. "Those are the breaches. That's why we need your help, Emily. They started started appearing a few moons ago, small at first, almost imperceptible. But they're growing, spreading. They are tears in the veil that separates our worlds and other realms beyond. And through them, things that should remain separate are beginning to pass. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she noticed how the other luminous ones moved away from the breaches, as if they feared getting too close. "What things?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Before Thimble could answer, a sound echoed through the forest, a sound that didn't belong in that place of beauty and wonder. It was a low, guttural sound, like the growl of a fierce animal, but with a metallic quality that made the hairs on the back of Emily's neck stand up. Immediately, all the luminous ones around them froze, some flying quickly upward, others hiding behind leaves and trunks. "We need to go," said Thimble urgently, pulling Emily's hand. "Now!" Without waiting for a response, Thimble began to guide her quickly through the trees. Away from the direction the sound had come from, Emily ran as fast as she could, her heart beating erratically. They arrived at a particularly large tree whose trunk had an opening that resembled a door. Thimble pushed her inside, following right after. The interior of the tree was surprisingly spacious and illuminated by bioluminescent mushrooms growing on the inner walls. There was strange furniture made of twisted wood and preserved flowers, and several other luminous creatures were already inside, all looking frightened. "What was that?" asked Emily, still trying to catch her breath. An older luminous one, with hair that seemed made of silver threads and wings that resembled those of a moth, approached. That human child was a light devourer, she said, in a voice that reminded Emily of tinkling crystals. "They come through the breaches, from the shadow realm. They are creatures that feed on the vital essence of our world, and yours too, although humans haven't yet noticed their presence." Emily frowned, confused. "My world too? Are you saying these creatures are going to Earth?" The older luminous one nodded gravely. "The breaches are appearing on both sides of the veil, small at first, in remote places of your world, but they're growing, just as they are here. That's why we need you, Emily," intervened Thimble. "The ancient texts speak of a time when the breaches would appear again, and only the child who can see would have the power to close them before it was too late." The older luminous one, who introduced herself as Elderbloom, elder of the luminous ones, approached Emily and examined her carefully. "Yes, she has the mark," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. With a delicate finger, she touched Emily's forehead, exactly between her eyes. Emily felt a strange sensation, like a warm tingling that spread throughout her face. "What mark?" she asked, instinctively bringing her hand to her forehead. Elderbloom smiled gently. "The mark of the seers, child, invisible to ordinary eyes, but bright as a star to us. It is the sign that you can see beyond the veil, that you can perceive the hidden truths of the universe. It is a rare gift among humans these days. There was a time when many of your kind could see us, could interact with our world, but as your species moved away from nature, as it stopped believing in the invisible, the gift became increasingly rare." Emily tried to process everything she was hearing. It was a lot of information at once, many concepts that challenged everything she knew about the world. "But what exactly do you expect me to do? How can I help close these breaches?" Elderbloom and Thimble exchanged glances, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, Elderbloom sighed and made a gesture with her hand. A small drawer opened in a nearby table, and from it floated to Emily what appeared to be a crystal the size of a chicken egg, perfectly transparent, except for a core that pulsed with a bluish light, very similar to the circle of light Emily had seen in her garden. "This is the crystal of balance," explained Elderbloom. "It was created thousands of years ago, when the veil between the worlds was established. It maintains the balance between all realms, yours, ours, and others that you can't even imagine exist. But the crystal is losing its power. See how its light is weak, flickering. When it goes out completely, the veil will fall, and all realms will collide in chaos." Emily looked at the crystal with fascination and apprehension. It seemed so small and fragile for something so important. "And how can I help?" she asked again. "The crystal needs to be recharged," replied Elderbloom, "and only someone who can see all realms can do it. You need to take the crystal to the nexus, the point where all worlds touch, and perform the renewal ritual." Thimble's face showed concern. "But the path to the nexus is dangerous, Elderbloom. She is just a human child." The elder nodded sadly. "Yes, it is dangerous, but we have no choice. The breaches are multiplying rapidly. If we don't act now, now, soon it will be too late. Emily looked from the crystal to Elderbloom, then to Thimble, and finally to the other luminous ones, who were watching her with hope and fear in their bright eyes. Part of her wanted to refuse, to say it was too much for a 9-year-old girl, that she needed to go back home, to the safety of her room and the normality of her life. But another part, the part that had always known she was different, that had always yearned for something extraordinary, knew she couldn't turn her back on this. "If I don't do this, what will happen?" she asked, her voice firmer than she expected. Elderbloom looked her directly in the eyes. "The light devourers will continue to pass through the breaches in ever-increasing numbers. They will consume our world first, then yours. Not all at once, not in an obvious way at first, but you will notice the signs. Plants dying for no apparent reason, animals disappearing, people falling ill with ailments that doctors can't explain. And then, when it's too late to stop, the very fabric of reality will begin to unravel." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility falling on her shoulders like a mantle too heavy for someone so young. But then she remembered all the stories she had read, of all the heroes and heroines who faced seemingly impossible challenges because it was the right thing to do. "I will help," she finally said, her voice small but determined. "But I don't know how to get to this nexus or how to perform this ritual." Elderbloom smiled, a smile that mixed relief and sadness. "Thimble will guide you. He knows the way. As for the ritual, you will know what to do when you get there. The gift of the seers includes intuitive knowledge that reveals itself when needed." At that moment, another sound echoed through the forest, closer this time, making the very walls of the tree they were in tremble. "They are approaching," said one of the smaller, luminous ones, his voice trembling with fear. "We need to leave immediately," decided Elderbloom, handing the crystal to Emily. It was surprisingly light, almost as if it had no weight at all, but Emily could feel a strange energy emanating from it, like a silent hum that reverberated through her fingers to her heart. "Thimble, take Emily by the path of the Whispering Willows. It's longer, but should be free of devourers for now." Thimble nodded, his small face determined despite the evident fear in his eyes. "Let's go, Emily. We don't have much time." Emily carefully tucked the crystal into the pocket of her robe and followed Thimble to an opening in the back of the tree that she hadn't noticed before. Before leaving, she turned to look at Elderbloom one last time. "I'll do my best," she promised. The elder smiled gently. "We know you will, child who can see. That's why you were chosen." Emily and Thimble emerged from the tree through a narrow passage that led them to a part of the forest that seemed even older and wilder. Here, the trees grew so close to each other that their branches intertwined high above, forming an almost impenetrable canopy that filtered the light into scattered rays of blue and silver. The path ahead of them was just a narrow trail that wound between thick roots that projected from the ground like ancient, twisted fingers. "This is the path of the Whispering Willows," explained Thimble, flying a bit ahead of Emily to illuminate the way. "It's called that because the willows that grow here are the oldest living beings in our realm. They say they whisper secrets to those who know how to listen." Emily looked around with fascination and a bit of apprehension. There was something about this part of the forest that seemed wilder, less welcoming than the eternal twilight forest. The shadows seemed deeper, the sounds more mysterious. Occasionally, she could swear she saw glowing eyes watching them from the shadows, disappearing when she tried to focus on them. "How long will it take us to reach the nexus?" she asked, keeping her voice low instinctively, as if afraid to disturb the almost sacred silence that surrounded them. "If we don't encounter problems, we'll arrive by the dawn of your world," replied Thimble, his own voice no louder than a whisper. "But we need to be cautious. The light devourers are not the only creatures we should avoid. Since the breaches began to appear, many of the more temperamental inhabitants of our realm have been restless, territorial." As if to emphasize his words, a strange sound echoed in the distance, something between an owl's hoot and a feline meow, but with a quality that made the hairs on the back of Emily's neck stand up. Thimble immediately dimmed his light, becoming almost invisible in the twilight. "Don't move," he whispered to Emily, who froze in place. For long seconds, they remained completely still, barely daring to breathe. The sound didn't repeat, and gradually Thimble began to glow again, though not as intensely as before. saw. "What was that?" asked Emily when she finally dared to speak again. "A night hunter," replied Thimble, looking nervously around. "They usually don't attack luminous ones, but with everything that's happening, and you, being human, would be a tempting prey for them." Emily swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of how vulnerable she was in this strange world. The crystal in her pocket seemed to pulse more rapidly, as if responding to her growing anxiety. They continued in silence for some time, Emily following Thimble along the winding trail, always alert to any suspicious sound or movement. As they advanced, Emily began to notice more signs that something was wrong in this world. There were areas where the plants seemed withered and lifeless, where the glowing moss had become grey and opaque, and, more disturbing, they occasionally passed by breaches, tears in reality itself that floated in the air like broken mirrors, showing only darkness on the other side. "They're everywhere," murmured Emily, observing a particularly large breach that pulsed slowly, as if breathing. "Yes," agreed Thimble sadly, "and they're growing. Each time a devourer passes through a breach, it expands a little more. It's a terrible cycle. The larger the breaches, the more devourers can pass through. The more devourers, the larger the breaches become." They had been walking for about an hour when they reached a clearing where several enormous willows grew in a perfect circle. Their leaves were a deep silver blue and seemed to move even without wind, as if they were whispering secrets to each other. In the center of the clearing was a small lake of perfectly still waters, so clear that Emily could see the bottom covered with glowing crystal. "We need to cross the lake," said Thimble. "On the other side, there's a passage that will lead us closer to the nexus." Emily looked around, confused. "But there's no boat. How will we cross?" Thimble smiled for the first time since they had left the safety of the tree. "The willows will help us, if you ask nicely. They like human children. They're rare around here." Emily looked at the imposing trees, feeling very small and insignificant before them. Should I talk to them?" she asked, uncertain. Thimble nodded encouragingly. "Yes, approach the largest one, touch its trunk, and ask for passage. But remember to be respectful. The willows are ancient and wise, but they can also be temperamental." With her heart beating fast, Emily approached the largest willow, whose bark shone like polished silver under the filtered light. Hesitantly, she extended her hand and touched the trunk. It was surprisingly warm to the touch, and Emily could feel something like a slow pulse under her fingers, as if the tree had a heart beating inside it. "Please," she said, her voice small but clear in the quietness of the clearing. "We need to cross the lake. Could you help us?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the leaves of the willow began to move more intensely, producing a sound that resembled words whispered in a language Emily didn't know, but somehow could understand. "Human child," the leaves seemed to say. "Why should we help you? Humans forgot about us long ago, stopped visiting us, stopped honoring us with their songs and stories." Emily felt a lump in her throat. It was true. Humans had forgotten about magic, had stopped believing in worlds beyond their own. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "Many of us have forgotten, it's true, but I haven't forgotten. I've always believed there was more to the world than what we can see. And now, I'm here trying to help save both our worlds." The leaves whispered more intensely, as if the willows were discussing among themselves. Finally, the large willow that Emily had touched moved one of its lower branches, gently touching the top of her head. "We see the truth in your heart, child who can see, and we sense the crystal of balance that you carry. Your mission is noble, and we will help." With that, the branches of all the willows began to move in unison, extending over the lake until they met in the center, intertwining to form a natural bridge. "Thank you," said Emily, genuinely grateful and a bit awed by the power and grace of those ancient creatures. "Go with care, little one," whispered the leaves, as Emily and Thimble began to cross the living bridge. "And remember, when you return to your world, tell our stories. Don't let us be forgotten again." Emily nodded solemnly, promising herself that no matter what happened, she would never forget what she was experiencing and would do her best to keep alive the memory of this magical world. The crossing of the branch bridge was tense. The branches, though firmly intertwined, still moved slightly under her feet, and the surface was uneven and sometimes slippery. Thimble flew at her side, unable to help her physically likely due to his diminutive size, but offering constant encouragement. When they finally reached the other side of the lake, Emily looked back and saw the willows retracting their branches, returning to their original position. "That was amazing," she said, still marveling at what she had witnessed. "The willows rarely help outsiders," commented Thimble, seeming impressed. "They must have sensed something special in you." Emily didn't have time to reflect on this, as Thimble was already guiding her to an almost invisible opening between two rocks covered with glowing moss. "This way," he said. "This passage will lead us through the Whispering Hills. It's a shortcut to the Nexus, but—" He hesitated, suddenly looking concerned. "But what?" asked Emily, feeling she wouldn't like the answer. "It's a dangerous path," admitted Thimble. "The hills are home to the changelings, creatures that can assume any form. They are mischievous at best, dangerous at worst." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Is there no other way?" Thimble shook his head. "Not if we want to reach the Nexus before it's too late. The breaches are expanding rapidly, Emily. I feel it, and I'm sure you can feel it too." It was true. Since they had left Elderbloom's tree, Emily had noticed that the crystal in her pocket was pulsing more and more frantically, and a sense of growing urgency had settled in her chest, as if an invisible countdown was underway. "All right," she said, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. "Let's go through the hills, but tell me what to expect, how I can protect myself from the changelings." Thimble seemed relieved by her decision. "The changelings are masters of disguise, but there is a way to identify them. No matter what form they take, their eyes always betray them. They have vertical pupils, like those of a cat, and they can't maintain a disguise for long if directly challenged. If you suspect you're talking to a changeling, ask 3 questions in rapid succession. They get easily confused when pressed to think quickly." With this information in mind, Emily followed Thimble through the narrow passage between the rocks. On the other side, the landscape changed drastically. The Whispering Hills were exactly as the name suggested, a series of gentle hills covered by tall grass that moved constantly, producing a sound like distant whispers. There were no trees here, only occasional rock formations that cast long shadows under the diffuse light that came from a sky that was neither day nor night, but something in between. "Stay close," warned Thimble, "and whatever you see or hear, don't stray from the path." Emily nodded, keeping as close as possible to her diminutive guide as they began to cross the first hill. The path was just a narrow trail through the tall grass, which sometimes seemed to move to block their way, forcing them to push it aside. The whispers of the grass seemed almost to form words at times, calling Emily's name, trying to lure her off the trail. She kept her eyes fixed on Thimble's glowing back, determined not to be distracted. They had just reached the top of the third hill when Emily heard something that made her stop abruptly. Her mother's voice calling her name. "Emily, Emily, where are you? We're so worried." She turned sharply, her heart racing. There, in the middle of the tall grass, was her mother, looking scared and relieved at the same time. "Mom?" said Emily, confused. How could her mother be there? "Emily, no!" shouted Thimble, flying quickly to position himself between her and the figure of her mother. "It's a trick. Look at her eyes." Emily forced herself to focus on the eyes of the figure that looked like her mother, and with an icy shock, saw that the pupils were vertical slits like those of a cat. "You're not my mother," she said, taking a step back. The figure smiled, a smile that extended too far at the corners, revealing teeth too pointed to be human. "Clever little seer," said the creature, its voice changing tone, becoming higher and more musical. "But are you clever enough to find your way out of the hills?" "We doubt that." Before Emily could respond, the false image of her mother dissolved into a silvery mist that quickly reformed into a strange creature, humanoid, but with limbs that were too long, skin as pale as porcelain, and those same feline eyes, now a bright green. "A changeling," whispered Thimble, positioning himself protectively in front of Emily, though his small size made the gesture more symbolic than practical. "What do you want?" asked Emily, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear she felt. The changeling tilted its head to the side at an impossible angle for a human neck. "We want to play, of course," it replied in a voice that reminded Emily of the tinkling of glass bells. "It's been so long since we had a human child to play with, and you're not just any human child, are you? You're the child who can see." "How fun!" As it spoke, broke, more silvery mists began to form around them, each transforming into another changeling, until Emily and Thimble were surrounded by at least a dozen of them, all smiling those two wide smiles, all with bright feline eyes in different colors. "We don't have time for games," said Thimble, his voice small but determined. "We're on an important mission. The breaches—" "Ah yes, the breaches," interrupted the first changeling, making a dismissive gesture with a hand of two long fingers. "Everyone is so worried about them, so serious, so scared. We changelings see things differently. Change is our nature. Why fear the change that the breaches bring?" Emily realized with a shiver that the changelings weren't just being mischievous. They genuinely didn't care about the threat the breaches posed. Perhaps they even saw them as something positive, a source of chaos and transformation that matched their own changeable nature. "The breaches don't just bring change," she said, trying to make them understand. "They bring destruction. Haven't you seen what's happening to the forest, to this entire world? If we don't do something, there will be no more whispering hills for you to inhabit, no more travelers for you to play tricks on." The changelings exchanged glances, and for a moment Emily thought she had managed to reach them, but then the leader threw its head back and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Pretty words, little seer, but if you want our permission to cross our territory, you'll have to earn that right. We have a game for you." Emily looked at Thimble, who seemed resigned. "We have no choice," he whispered. "The changelings won't let us pass unless we participate in their game. They are the most stubborn creatures in the realm." Emily sighed, feeling the weight of the crystal in her pocket, remembering the urgency of her mission, but she saw no alternative. "What kind of game?" she asked the leader of the changelings. The creature's smile widened even more, almost splitting its face in half. "A game of truths and lies, of course. What else would be suitable for the masters of disguise?" With a fluid movement, the changeling split into three identical copies of itself, all smiling the same disturbing smile. "Three of us, three statements. Only one of us will tell the truth. Identify which, and you may pass. Fail, and you'll stay with us forever, a new addition to our collection of toys." Time passed, seasons changed, and Emily grew up, but the magic that had entered her life on that extraordinary night never disappeared. On the contrary, it flourished and deepened, becoming as fundamental to her existence as the air she breathed. As the years went by, Emily developed her gifts as a seer under Thimble's patient guidance and occasional visits to the realm of the luminous ones, becoming increasingly comfortable in her role as guardian of the balance between worlds. What had begun as a frightening and unexpected adventure had transformed into a life journey filled with constant discoveries and endless wonders. And although she kept her gifts secret from most people, Emily was never truly alone. Besides Thimble and the other luminous ones who had made their home in the old oak tree, she gradually met other seers, some young like her, others older, each with their own story of how they had discovered the magic hidden in the ordinary world. Together, they formed an invisible network of guardians, monitoring the veil between worlds, repairing small breaches before they could grow, and occasionally helping lost magical beings find their way back home. It was important work, often challenging, sometimes dangerous, but Emily never wished for a different life. How could she, when each day brought new wonders, new mysteries to be unraveled? As a teenager, Emily began recording her experiences in journal, not for publication or fame, but to preserve the knowledge, to ensure that the connection between worlds would never be completely forgotten again. Pages upon pages filled with detailed descriptions of magical creatures, maps of locations where the veil was thinnest, spells and enchantments learned from beings from other realms, a constantly growing compendium of magic destined to be passed on to the next generation of seers when the time came. On her 18th birthday, Emily received another special gift from the realm of the luminous ones, a formal invitation to become an ambassador of the worlds, a position of great honor that very few humans had held throughout history. The ceremony was held at the Nexus, now a place of resplendent beauty, with the great crystal shining at full power in the center. Representatives from various realms attended, not just luminous ones, but also changelings, who behaved surprisingly well for the occasion, emissaries from the Whispering Willows, and even some creatures that Emily had never seen before, from worlds so distant and different that they could barely be comprehended by the human mind. It was a celebration of connection and balance, an acknowledgement that the barriers between worlds, though necessary, didn't need to be impenetrable.